You might not believe what the little girl in this story has endured. Her truth is haunting, and I think you'll be just as stunned as I was. Please watch the full video to understand the life of this 10-year-old girl and her grandfather. Welcome back. The car rolled to a stop in front of the rusted gate. The driver, a friend of Mr. Walters, stepped out and opened the back door. Emma stepped down slowly, her legs trembling slightly. She had only a backpack and a small purple suitcase, scuffed and dusty from the long trip. Her brown hair hung messily over her pale face, half covering it like a curtain. Mr. Walters stood quietly on the porch, tall and bony, dressed in faded denim overalls and a plaid shirt with rolled sleeves. His beard was streaked with gray, and his eyes were deep-set and unreadable. He just gave a small nod, reserved, cautious. "Hello, sir," Emma mumbled, eyes fixed on her dirty boots. Walter nodded again. "Come in, it's getting dark." Her room was upstairs at the end of the hallway, the same room her mother once slept in. Nothing had changed. A few old books were still on the shelf, a faded rag doll on the bed, and a framed picture of her mother as a child, face faintly, echoing Emma's. Emma glanced around, set her suitcase beside the bed, and sat down, hugging her knees. There were no tears, just a hollow, numbing quiet that settled in her chest. Dinner was fried chicken and boiled vegetables. Walter wasn't a fancy cook, but he was steady. Emma barely ate, nibbling at the vegetables, sat across from one another in silence. The only sound, the ticking clock on the wall. "Want more?" he asked. Not warm, but not cold either. Emma shook her head. "I'm full." Walter didn't insist. He was used to silence. Wait. But her silence had unsettled him. He watched her, small, delicate, closed off. That night, Emma lay on her side, staring at the wall, eyes open. Downstairs, Walter sat in his creaky chair by the window, reading under a lamp, though the words made no sense. Only one image lingered. In his mind, the girl upstairs, and a question he couldn't shake. What had happened to her? Morning came with sunlight streaking across the faded walls. The rooster's crow and distant tractor hum signaled a new day. Emma woke early but stayed in bed, eyes on the ceiling, searching for herself in the quiet. Walter had been up a while, already in the chicken coop, feeding the hens. His boots sank into the damp earth. When he heard soft footsteps, he turned. Emma stood barefoot in slippers far too big, hair tousled, arms hanging stiffly. "Want to feed them?" Walter offered, holding out a basket of grain. She hesitated, then nodded. They worked side by side. Chickens clucked and flapped, pecking eagerly. Emma gave a soft laugh when one nipped her toe. That faint laugh light as a breeze made Walter look up. Her face was softer, not so tense. "Ever had chickens before?" he asked. Emma shook her head. "No, not in that place. The place before." Her voice caught. She looked away. The name of that place was something she couldn't say. Walter didn't press. That afternoon they visited the village market. Emma stayed close, clutching a cloth bag. Though the townspeople were warm, she flinched when anyone approached, her eyes flicking to Walter like he was her anchor. Back home, a drawing waited on the kitchen table, a chicken pecking grain. Scribbled beneath it were the words, "Her name is Becky." Walter smiled. It had been years since a child's drawing sat in his kitchen. That night, Emma had the nightmare again: a dark room, the smell of alcohol, a shadowed figure, the weight of an arm that felt like iron. She woke in a panic, soaked in sweat. Heart. THUDDING. The door creaked open. Walter stood there with an oil lamp. "What's wrong?" he asked softly. Emma shook her head, eyes red, body trembling. Walter didn't enter. "If you need me, I'll be just outside. You can call." He started to turn away. I hate footsteps," Emma whispered. Walter paused. "Footsteps in the night?" She nodded faintly, but said no more. "I'll walk softer," he said. "And remember, no one enters your room unless you want them to." No one. The next morning, Emma found him in the coop, clutching another piece of paper. She held it up. A second chicken drawn beside Becky. His name's Walter. He's the leader of the flock. Walter gave a dry chuckle, his first in years. He nodded, eyes glinting. Shh. Was opening bit by bit. Summer passed like a slow river. Their days found rhythm. Emma rose at dawn, helped with chores, picked vegetables, and watered the apple trees behind the house. Walter still said little, but he noticed everything: the startle in her eyes at loud sounds, her quiet moods. He always saved the best bites of dinner for her, one day. While cleaning the barn, Emma found an old wooden box filled with her mother's childhood things, a diary, some worn pens, and a yellowing photo of Walter and his daughter back when her grandmother was alive. Emma touched the picture, finger tracing her mother's face. She turned. Was Mommy always smiling? Walter glanced up, alt for a while. All the time. Talked a lot too. Nothing like you. Emma smiled. It flickered, brief. I used to talk a lot too, but not anymore. Simple words. But they landed. Like a stone dropped into deep water. Walter felt the weight ripple inside. One hot afternoon, Emma sat beneath the apple tree, drawing. Her sketch, Walter with his straw hat and hoe not perfect, but the eyes were true. Those deep, ash-warm eyes. Walter peered over her shoulder. Drawing helps you remember? Emma nodded. I did not have to say it. He asked nothing more. But he understood. Her art held what her words could not. That night, brushing her hair for bed, Emma turned. Grandpa, if someone hurts someone else, but there's no proof, will they still be punished? Walter set his book down. He didn't. Rush? Maybe? If someone finds the courage to tell the truth. Emma nodded slowly. Nothing more was said. But Walter saw clearly she wanted to speak, just not yet. One evening, thunder rolled and lightning flashed. Emma curled up in bed, whispering a nursery rhyme through trembling lips. Walter entered with a flashlight. He sat on the edge of the bed, not touching her, just placing the light between them. What scares you most? He asked gently. Emma didn't answer for a long time. I'm scared no one will believe me. Walter nodded. No questions? No digging. I believe you, he said quietly, even if you never say a word. One Sunday, Walter took Emma to Thevillage Church, where there was a small community service every month. Emma held his hand tightly the whole time, her eyes darting around restlessly when the pastor reached out to greet her. Her face pale as if she had seen a ghost, Walter bowed slightly in apology and led Emma out. They did not speak all the way home. Buth could feel that something in Emma had broken again, but he did not fully understand what it was that night. While cleaning the room, Walter accidentally found a piece of drawing paper hidden under Emma's pillow. He did not mean to peek, but the drawing made him unable to take his eyes off it. It was a faceless man with long, large arms, standing behind a small crying girl. The corner of the picture was a dark room. The window locked. Walter's heart ached. The next morning he visited Junahay's old neighbor and his wife's best friend. She had always told him about the village, and she knew his family better than anyone else. When your daughter left to follow her new husband, I was worried, Jun said, stirring her tea. What's wrong? The way you looked at people, always smiling, but his eyes weren't smiling. I caught him screaming at your daughter in the parking lot. And she was quiet. Walter squeezed her hand. You think he ever did anything to her? June looked at him, was silent for a moment, and then sighed. I don't know, but if you suspect something, you should trust your instincts. That night, Emma stood on the porch clutching a small teddy bear. There was a light mist, and the moon hung low in the thin clouds. Walter stood beside her, hands in his pockets. Do you miss? He asked softly. Emma did not answer immediately. After a moment she said, I miss. When? You were still me. What do you mean? When you still saw me as a child. We needed love, not a burden, when you still believed in me. Walter did not ask any more questions. He knew all the answers would come, but he could not force them. He just reached out gently, placing his hand on her shoulder, like an unspoken North. Next morning, he began writing again. One Sunday, Walter took Emma to Thevillage Church, where there was a small community service every month. Emma held his hand tightly the whole time, her eyes darting around restlessly. When the pastor reached out to greet her, Emma stopped, drew back, her face pale as If she'd seen a ghost, Walter bowed slightly in apology and led Emma out. They did not speak all the way home. Buth could feel that something in Emma had broken again, but he did not fully understand what it was that night while cleaning the room. Walter accidentally found a piece of drawing paper hidden under Emma's pillow. He did not mean to peek, but the drawing made him unable to take his eyes off. It was a faceless man with long, large arms standing behind a small, crying girl. The corner of the picture was a dark room. The window locked. Walter's heart ached. The next morning, he visited Juna's old neighbor and his wife's best friend. She had always told him about the village, and she knew his family better than anyone else. When your daughter left to follow her new husband, I was worried, Jun said, stirring her tea. What's wrong? The way you looked at people, always smiling, but his eyes weren't smiling. I caught him screaming at your daughter in the parking lot, and she was quiet. Walter squeezed her hand. Do you think he ever did anything to her? June looked at him, was silent for a moment. And then said, I don't know, but if you suspect something, you should trust your instincts. That night, Emma stood on the porch clutching a small teddy bear. There was a light mist, and the moon hung low in the thin clouds. Walter stood beside her, hands in his pockets. Do you miss? He asked softly. Emma did not answer immediately. After a moment, she said, I miss when you were still me. What do you mean, when you still saw me as a child, when needed love, not a burden, when you still believed in me? Walter did not ask any more questions. He knew all the answers would come, but he could not force them. He just reached out, gently placing his hand on her shoulder like an unspoken support. Next morning, he began writing in his diary again, for the first time in more than 10 years. His first line was, no longer trusts anyone, but he still trusts chickens, and trusts me. I must keep that trust. Autumn came with the smell of dry leaves and the mild air. Emma had just turned 12. She had grown a little taller, her hair had grown longer, and she often wore an old brown hoodie, a gift that Walter had bought at a village fair. The life between the two of them was as simple as the cycles of the seasons. Then one day an express letter arrived. Walter repenned the letter in the living room. A few short lines printed on cold white paper. We are deeply sorry to inform you that your daughter Linda passed away in a traffic accident on the night of October 2nd. His hands trembled, his old eyes no longer cried easily, but his heart felt as if someone was squeezing it. He folded the letter, sat down on a wooden chair, and looked out the window where Emma was painting beside the apple tree. Walter did not tell the story right away. It wasn't until the evening after dinner, when the two of them sat drinking apple tea as usual, that he spoke softly. Your mother is gone. Emma was speechless. Her hand dropped the cup she was holding. The tea spilled on her shirt, but she didn't notice when her voice trembled. Last week. Car accident, she nodded. There were no tears, no cries, just an empty gaze, as if the whole world had gone silent. That night, Walter heard sobbing coming from Emma's room. He didn't go in, just sat leaning against the hallway like a gatekeeper to her sadness. 3 weeks later, a black car stopped right in front of the house. A man stepped out of the car, a black suit, a crimson tie, walking straight, but his eyes were furtive like a wild animal stalking its prey. It was him, the man from years ago. Linda's husband, Emma's stepfather, Mr. Walter, he said, half polite, half cold. I've come to get Emma. Her mother is dead, and I'm her legal guardian. Walter stood silently on the steps, his eyes dark. He didn't come down, or did he invite him in? She's not going anywhere, with all due respect. He pulled a day's sheath of papers from his pocket. I have full custody of her. It's a court order, and her mother agreed to sign. It's my responsibility. Emma stepped out of the house just in time to see him. Her whole body froze. The pencil she was holding fell to the porch floor, breaking in twain. Her eyes, it was no longer the image of her guardian, but a real nightmare standing there in broad daylight. She backed away, slipping on the floor, her mouth trembling as she uttered two words, no, he no. Walter turned around, catching his niece in time. He put his arms around her, his eyes as hard as cold iron. Get off my land, he said in a low, steady voice. If you come back without the courthouse behind you, I'll call the police. The man said nothing more. Hegov. Emma, one last look, curled his lips, half a smile, half a threat, and turned and walked back to his car. The black car disappeared behind the corn. Emma Wastel shaking in his arms. Walter knew this war had only just Began the next morning, Walter went to the county courthouse to ask about the guardianship. The clerk, after checking records, confirmed that Linda's husband, Emma's stepfather, was now the legal guardian, according to the paper signed earlier. Unless you have proof that this person is unfit, she said, you cannot keep your granddaughter without this consent or a court order. Walter left the courthouse feeling bitter. He had believed in the law all his life, but no. It was like a trap set, forcing a child back to a place that had scared her to sleep. When he told Emma that he needed a lawyer, she panicked. I don't want to go to court. I don't want to see him anymore. Walter hugged her. I know, but without a court we can't protect you forever. Emma was silent. She understood, but the fear in her eyes could not be hidden, like a small fire still smoldering in her heart. News of the custody dispute spread throughout the village. Some people supported Walter, but many others were as scornful. That man is the husband of the girl's mother, after all. Mr. Walter has no legal rights. She is just an illegitimate child, not your biological child. Walter did not respond. He had no time for gossip. Spent every evening taking notes, writing in his diary, collecting every detail that Emma had ever shared, even if it was just a drawing, a dream, a vague statement. One day, when Walter went to get the mail, he heard screaming in the house. He rushed in to find Emma huddled beside the desk, her head in her hands. On the floor was a new letter, an unmarked black envelope with a photograph inside. Emma with her mother and him. From Thingle of the photograph, you could see his hand on Emma's shoulder, squeezing it tightly. Unnaturally, Emma sobbed. He wanted me to remember. Walter squeezed the photograph tightly in his hand, then threw it into the fireplace. Scorched pieces swirled with black smoke. No one is allowed to scare me again. 2 days later, Walter met with a young lawyer named Laura, who had been his daughter's student. After listening to him, she was silent for a moment, then said, we can file for a temporary restraining order if we can prove that Tima is in danger of mental or physical harm, but we'll need proof, and Emma might have to go to court. Walter nodded. As long as my niece isn't taken away. Laura looked at him, her eyes determined, but also tired with age, and she said, then we'll start today. That evening, Emma put the sketchbook on the table, the first pagawas, a picture of a wooden house, 2 figures standing side by side, one tall with a silver beard, the other small. Drawing on the roof were the words in small letters in crayon, home where no strange footsteps are heard. Walter put his hand on Emma's head gently. This fight would not be easy, but he would not lose. The day of the trial came sooner than Walter expected. Every morning he took Emma for a walk around the fields to calm her down. She was still quiet, but for the first time she held his hand tightly, as if trying to hold on to the last bit of peace. You don't have to sign anything if you're not ready, Walter said. As they sat under the apple tree, the court can hear from anyone else. But if you're willing to talk, I'll be there for you. Emma nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the distant horizon. The county courthouse was in the center of the small town, where all eyes were on the heated dispute. Inside the courtroom, cold white light fell on the wooden table and benches behind it. Emma's stepfather sat with his lawyer, as a lower-haired man, smooth and convincing. He wore a gray suit, and his demeanor was as if everything was in his hands. Walter's lawyer, Laura, on the other hand, was young, inexperienced, but her eyes were always burning with enthusiasm. She stood beside Walter and Emma, holding a thin file which contained what the two had been preparing for the past months. Walter's diary, Emma's drawings, and a few vague statements. Not enough, Laura thought. We need something really strong. The trial began. The plaintiff's stepfather's side produced the marriage certificate, the legal guardianship agreement that Smo's mother had signed before she died. His lawyer argued clearly, my client is the sole legal guardian at the moment. Mr. Walter, as the maternal grandfather, has no clear legal right to keep the child. When questioned, he said softly, I love her like my own daughter. The current estrangement is due to Mr. Walter's deliberate attempt to separate her. Walter almost jumped up in protest, but Laura put a hand on his shoulder, reassuring him gently. It was the defense's turn. Laura presented her suspicions. Emma's erratic behavior, her nightmares, her unstable drawings, and her extreme fear of her stepfather. The judge nodded, but his face gave little away. Does she have anything to say herself? He asked, his voice soft but clear. Emma sat with her head bowed. After a long moment, she shook her head slightly, her lips pressed together, her hands clasped together until they were white. "No, I don't want to talk thistlance." Stretched, Laura stood up, trying to keep her composure. "Your Honor, children have been traumatized often, don't tell the truth right away. But that doesn't mean the trauma isn't there." The plaintiff's lawyer chuckled, then retorted, "And we can't rely on feelings as a substitute for evidence." The judge asked both sides to sit down, and he would consider the decision later. Walter felt his hands shaking for the first time in years. He felt helpless. Emma turned to him, whispering, "If I tell you, will I be able to stay with you forever?" Looked deeply into his granddaughter's eyes that had been betrayed too many times. "No one can take away from me if I'm brave enough to stay." The girl looked at him, nodding slowly. Her eyes were no longer dull, but lit up with a small spark. The judge put down the file, took off his glasses, and exhaled softly. The courtroom fell into a tense silence. Hell looked around, his voice low and steady. "There is no direct evidence or clear testimony from the victim. The details provided, while thought-provoking, are not sufficient to deny the plaintiff legal guardianship." Walter felt his heart sink to a stone. Sat beside him, eyes wide but unblinking. As if time had frozen, therefore, the judge continued, "The court will wait." A female voice rang out from the back of the courtroom, cutting off the statement. Everyone turned. A woman entered. She, which was petite, her hair tied back in a hurry, her eyes a mixture of worry and determination. She stood in the middle of the courtroom, looking straight at the judge. My name is Maria. I used to work for his family, and I have something to say." Laura's lawyer hurried over to her, whispering confirmation of her identity. Maria shakily extended her hand, held a copy of Emma's stepfather's old personnel file. "I'll be a witness," she said. "I saw him act inappropriately." Ardor. The courtroom shook. The plaintiff's lawyer objected immediately, but the judge raised his hand to maintain order. Maria continued, her voice shaking at first but growing firmer. "Isa, him put his hands on Emma. She was napping. Not once I tried to tell her Martha, but he threatened to sue me, fire me, and worse. I was touched by him." Tush paused, took a deep breath. "But today, I can't stay silent. I don't want another child to be afraid of their stepfather." Emma bowed her head, tears starting to fall. Walter put his arm around. He was shoulders like a cliff, protecting her from a fierce storm. Laura's lawyer immediately asked the court to allow Maria to be an additional witness. The judge nodded. The brief interrogation took place. Maria answered clearly, her eyes never leaving the man she once called boss. The stepfather sat motionless. His eyes were no longer arrogant, but slightly trembling. He understood this time. The mask had fallen after a few minutes of deliberation. The judge returned, his voice more serious than ever, based on the direct testimony of the new witness and the current psychological state of little Emma. The court declares that temporary suspension of the plaintiff's guardianship, the custody and care will belong to the maternal grandfather, Walter Graves, until the final investigation is concluded. Walter breathed the sigh of relief, his hand tightly clasping Emma's trembling little hand. The little girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears, but no longer tears of fear, but tears of joy, as if the whole world had just turned it on. As she walked out of the courtroom, the early afternoon sunlight was slanting through the large glass window. Seema gently squeezed his hand, looking up. "You won't have nightmares anymore, right?" Walter chuckled, gently placing his hand on her head. "If you do, I'll dream with you so you two can know how to get out." Behind Maria stood, silently watching, her hands clutching the cloth bag. She said nothing, only smiled slightly, perhaps for the first time in many years. Had just escaped her own darkness. The following spring, Emma stood on the threshold of 13. She was no longer the shy girl who had hidden behind her grandfather, but a growing woman with a deeper, more determined gaze, as if the dark nights she had experienced had forged a strong heart. Walter's old wooden house gradually came to life. The flower pots on the porch were in full bloom, and paintings covered the walls. Seema turned the attic into her own studio, where she spent hours each week, drawing not just to forget, but to Tiloni. Of the most striking paintings was of two silhouettes sitting side by side under an apple tree, one tall, one small. In the corner of the painting she wrote, "We sat through many summers and each was thirst." Walter was getting older. His hair was gray and his hands, Samota trembled as he made his morning tea, but the smile remained. The same, and it was still a special smile reserved for his granddaughter. Every evening he sat on the porch listening to Emma tell stories about school, her friends, the time she slipped and fell on the soccer field, or the time her art teacher asked her, "Who did you learn to draw from?" From someone who couldn't hold a brush. She replied, but knew how to balance my heart. Walter smiled. "That's flattering, not flattering," Emma said slightly. "I'm thanking you." The years that followed flowed like a smooth river, smooth, steady. Without thunder or sudden shadows, Emma grew. Taller, almost as tall as him, with her hair cut short to her shoulders, often tied back with a blue ribbon, the color she called the most peaceful one summer day. When Emma was 16, she was invited to participate in a state youth art exhibition. Among the selected works there was one that made people pause the longest, a small wooden roof with 2 old wooden chairs in front, one of them empty. Beneath it was the inscription, "There are people who don't go to school to be parents, but they live like a mountain." Walter stood beside his granddaughter at the exhibition. He said nothing, just smiled, his eyes sparkling like the sunlight on the rice fields. One day after they sat watching the sunset, Emma suddenly asked, "If Yo hadn't kept me, did you ever think about what would have happened?" Walter was silent for a long time. "I thought Yo would have lived, but maybe Yo would have lived like a tree that has been broken and has to grow back. Crooked wick, no, you grow straight even with scars." "That's what I know," Emma nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. The summer wind blew through the porch, carrying the scent of lavender and in spoken words. The day Emma graduated from high school, the sun was mild, the schoolyard was festooned with flags, and flowers. Rows of chairs were neatly arranged, an nth crowd of parents. Walter sat on a folding wooden chair wearing an old straw hat, the only thing he found suitable for such a solemn occasion. He watched Emma walk up to the stage to receive her diploma. Her hair was teed back, her smile was bright, her steps were confident, as if she had never been afraid of the dark, unlike the other children. Emma did not walk alone. She held out her hand, inviting Walter to walk up with her. The whole schoolyard was silent for a few seconds. Then there was a round of applause, soft but sincere, when she received her diploma. She turned to him and said softly enough for only he to hear, "I'm standing here because you never left your seat." Walter laughed, his throat tightening. He didn't need any more words. That one look was enough to last a lifetime. That evening, after a small party with a few close friends, Emma and he returned to tow the familiar wooden house. The sky was full of stars. Walter sat on a wooden bench on the porch, and Emma, in a simple white dress, carried 2 glasses of apple juice, placing one in his hand. "You know," she began, "many people ask me if I resent the past. What do you say?" "I say no. I'm just grateful for what I have now, Andy. I'm proud that I got through it without losing myself." Walter nodded, not answering. He took a sip of apple juice. Sithin leaned his head back against the back of the chair. They were both silent for a moment, listening only to the chirping of insects in the night. Emma pulled a folded letter from her skirt pocket. She handed it to him. "Zine, I wrote this in my last English class. The topic was write to someone watch changed your life, but I didn't turn it in. I wanted to give it to you." Walter opened it, the familiar slanted handwriting, each line imbued with something both mature and innocent. "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be me. If it weren't for you, I would have thought adults were the ones who kept quiet when children needed saving. If it weren't for you, I would have grown up believing that love was conditional, but thanks to you, it learned that there are people who are willing to go against the flow, that family isn't just blood, but a place where people choose to hold on to each other, that true love is when someone dares to sit quietly in the hallway all night just so someone doesn't feel lonely." Walter read the last line. High sighs blurred. Emma leaned her head on his shoulder and asked softly, "Are you tired?" "No," he replied her arsely. "Ye have never felt more alive than I do now." The moon was high, casting a soft light on the wooden roof. A gentle breeze blew through the apple orchard, rustling the old leaves on the wooden bench. 2 people, one old, one young, sat silently as if they were the quietest part of anniversarying world. And as that night ended, so did Emma's childhood, complete whole, without a single piece missing. Emma's story may be over, but what's shown through and how she recovered from it resonates. What do you think of this journey about a girl who lost her childhood, but found it again through the silent love of a grumpy old man, about a maid who dared to speak the truth when no one else dared about courtrooms. Where the law seems cold, but there is still room for courage, for justice. Have you ever known an Emma? Or been one? Do you believe that love, however clumsy, however late, can be a savior? And if not, perhaps now is the time to start believing. See you in the next story, Daily Unexpected Stories.